Hey, what's going on, everybody? Welcome to the Thriving Minds podcast with your host, Walter Parada, where we strive to provide you with empowering talks so you can live to thrive. If you like topics related to empowering yourself, remember to subscribe to our podcast and our channel. Well, I hope you find yourself in the right frame of mind, focusing on all the things within your control. And if not, we can reset and get back to that place. All right, so today's topic, we're going to be talking about looking forward to what is yet to come. So how do you feel about the future? Is this something that excites you, that you're really eager of what's yet to come? Or is this something that you dread because of past events indicating that it's only going to continue for the worse? We all tend to have a little bit of both, but we do have one side that we're more inclined to be in. The better that we're off in terms of the living situation that we're in, the experiences that we have, the people that are in our lives that really uplift us, that naturally is going to make us feel more optimistic about the future. And on the flip side, if our living situation is less than ideal and those experiences that we had were difficult and the people around us are maybe not the best influence, all this can shape that pessimistic point of view. This is part of the environment that we're in. It really impacts how we think and our perspective that determines how we conduct ourselves, how we act, and ultimately the decisions we make. We look to our past to get a sense of how the future is going to play out. There's that tendency to try to extrapolate what's already happened to determine what we see ourselves doing. A good example is if I did well in school, then I can envision myself doing well in college and then later doing well in a highly regarded professions such as engineering. But if I struggle in school, then I'll use that information to determine that continuing down that traditional education route is ill-suited for me. Our past alone does not indicate what is yet to come, only if we behave and act the same way we did in the past. We can always do something about our future, and just because difficult moments were experienced does not mean that same outcome is always going to occur. It's not just expecting that bad results are going to happen. If you happen to be pessimistic about the future, you can actually do things to change that perspective simply by using the power that you already have. And that power is the action that you take. The more action that you take that is progressive, the more invigorated you become. That's naturally going to make you optimistic because you're doing things within your control to position yourself for better and better situations. It's building a sense of independence, knowing that you directly have a say in how things play out. While things may not play out exactly how you want them to or envision them to, you at least are giving yourself a better chance of shaping how it could turn out. And the more effective you are in doing what's needed, the higher probability you give yourself of getting what you're striving for. It no longer becomes relying on hope, where you're hoping things swing your way, hoping you catch a break, hoping that somebody or something helps you out, where you're committed to doing what's necessary. Hope is a good thing, and it's actually needed to help fuel that optimism that can turn things around. But you got to layer that on with some sort of action that you take. The more that you can reinforce it with what you're doing, what you're striving for, then eventually hope is not the biggest factor in determining how well you're going to do. So let's just say, for example, you have the hope of one day traveling to Switzerland. Maybe it's one of the dream destinations that you want to go to. But if you just look at your past, where maybe you traveled very little, if at all, then this can seem out of reach. Hope serves as that spark that gives you that little bit of nudge to set things in motion. Remember though, that's all it is. It's just going to help you to get going, and it's on you to build and continue that momentum. Depending on where you live, going to Switzerland can be an expensive trip. So it's going to take a little bit of digging into figuring out how exactly to make it happen. Probably the first thing that you're going to be thinking about is, how many days will I stay? How much is the trip going to cost? Where will I stay? How am I going to get around? All these different things you got to think through, to figure out the logistical piece. If not, it's just going there and hoping things kind of work out. For some people, this can be very off-putting. Oh, that's too much work to try to figure out, the different parts of the trip that needs to get planned out. This can either be laziness or self-doubt, or maybe even a bit of both that feeds going down that path. And if you're willing to give into it, then maybe it's something that is not as important as what you might think. Because if it is, you're willing to work through it. You're willing to figure it out, which, yes, takes time to do. When you can work through this, optimism gets bigger that fuels you to dig deeper, to really make this trip happen. And this is one of the fundamental differences between those that dream of what could be and those that actually go ahead and make them a reality. Of course, those that are optimistic are still going to experience disappointment, will still experience failure, but the real strength that allows them to rebound from it is the resiliency. To know that that was just a moment in time and what was done just needs to be improved upon. The seductive thing in cases where you just come up short is just wanting to give in to that resistance, not fight it and just let it be. But if that consistently becomes the urge, then eventually it's going to become a habit. So each time something difficult is faced, it's going to fuel that pessimism, the self-doubt that makes you just let things play out with you not really ever doing anything about it. And that's very depressing because we all have power to affect the outcome of how we experience life. Yes, there are so many things that are outside of our control, and even if we did everything right, that doesn't guarantee that the outcome we want is going to be produced. But it does give you a better chance of achieving what you set out for. So just because it's not guaranteed that your time and energy is going to pay off, it's still worth doing so. Because you're just going to carry those habits into the next thing you do. And eventually, you're going to have breakthroughs. You're going to reach what you set out for. And just a note, a certain level of pessimism is good because it helps you kind of foresee potential roadblocks or bad outcomes that might occur. And with the right level of this, it makes you aware of how potentially you could overcome the challenges that you face. It's just going to be important for that pessimism not to get so far carried away where it immediately causes you to become more defensive at the things that seem out of your grasp, but only at that moment. There's just going to be a need for a certain level of balance between pessimism and optimism. So optimism can see what's really going on that limits the amount of progress that is made. It's not so much 50-50. It just depends on really how it best suits you. For some people, this might work. For other people, maybe it's 70% optimism and 30% pessimism. These are all just general ideas, of getting some sort of healthy balance that works for you. To help manage the pessimism that comes about, really come to question the things that's invoking some of that fear that might be running wild, where you're able to give yourself time to really process this and have solutions. And it really calms you down or reset those expectations that you can do what you really want. So let's say, for example, your hope is to one day run your own flower shop because you just love being around plants. You love the different types of flowers that each plant produces. And it just brings you overall joy, right? But if you've been around that environment very little, if nobody's really showed you how exactly to care for them and run a business, then obviously some pessimism is going to come about. But that's really an opportunity to plan out the ideas that you have. Come to see pessimism as the logistical piece needed to make all your grand ideas happen. It's the execution part that goes along with what's possible. Remember, if it's important enough to you, then you're going to do the things that are necessary to make it happen. In this case, it's simply just putting thought to kind of ease those concerns of not knowing how to run a flower shop. There's so many ways to gain the knowledge and experience to give you the confidence to move forward in pursuing running your own flower shop. You could go to a local flower shop and ask them about, hey, how does the business work? Or better yet, you could ask them, hey, could I work here? And then you get that hands-on experience and kind of constantly be asking them questions, this and that. And then eventually, with enough experience, you'll gain the confidence that you're on your way. Or you could read books that educate yourself on how to do so. Really, it can be anything that you want. It's not just specific to a flower shop. It could be running your own coffee shop, maybe running your own food truck. Maybe it's going to college because you want to become a scientist, maybe a botanist. If you like these empowering talks, remember to subscribe to our podcast and our channel. The more that you can start digging and prying to gain the information, it's going to naturally bring that level of pessimism down to a healthy level while raising your optimism that fuels your want to succeed in your pursuits. We all have a certain spectrum on both ends where we're experiencing the no way it can't be done, and on the flip side of, oh yeah, it's totally going to happen. And depending on what situation you're in is where it becomes more prominent. So let's say, for example, you're a generally optimistic person, but maybe you had a very bad experience related to dogs because maybe one of them bit you when you were really young. And now each time you see a dog or somebody talks about a dog, it immediately strikes a nerve that makes you flee. These experiences can be traumatizing because they could have been too much for us to handle at the time. It's a shocking surprise that just causes us to stare at it in fear. But just because that certain dog bit you, it doesn't mean all dogs are like that. Who knows what could have caused them to do that? Now, the obvious thing is maybe the dog was just aggressive, poorly handled, poorly trained, that led them to be like that. Or maybe it was something else, who knows? What could help overcome this is simply just kind of figure out how to have good experiences with a dog. Because for a lot of people, dogs are a very joyful presence to have. You know, it naturally uplifts them. That makes them feel wanted, cared for, and loved. And when you can kind of see that part of it, then it helps to overcome those bad experiences that you once had. So it's thinking about the potential benefits of overcoming the fear of what that one difficult moment did to you. This approach can be applied to so many different things where it kind of gets you out of that very pessimistic point of view to then being maybe a little bit more neutral, to then maybe being optimistic or more optimistic. Maybe it's ideal for you to get to that neutral state. Again, this would be having, almost an exact balance, 50-50, where you're half pessimistic and half optimistic. So you're not too high and not too low. And that's great if you can do that. And in fact, it might make you better at making those hard decisions because of the ability to manage your emotions from it really running the show. The whole point of optimism is to get you to take action, because many of the things that you want are simply going out there and making it happen. If we just take the simple approach of you being hungry, if you're hungry enough, you're going to go get something to eat. If you're thirsty enough, you're going to get something to drink. If your head itches enough, you're going to scratch it. There's enough urge that gets you to do something about it. If you're kind of hungry, but don't do anything about it, then maybe you're not hungry enough to get yourself some food. We all kind of have this feeling at times where we say we want to do something, yet we don't do it. And it could be just that the urge to do it is not yet strong enough, because if it was, you're going to find out what needs to be done. Just going out there, trying and figuring it out along the way. By looking forward to what is yet to come, it naturally makes you excited. That makes you put more time and energy into whatever it is that you're after. And by continuously doing this, you're ensuring that you're striving to put your best effort. Just think of how you operate when you're looking forward to doing something versus when you dread it. There tends to be a high amount of energy that gets you to want to do more. But when you're dreading something, you're already in that weak mental state of almost admitting defeat, admitting that things are just going to be bad. It's just being dismal in this type of state where you tend not to give your best effort because it appears that it's not going to make a difference anyways in how well you do. That's where we kind of have that urge to just give up. A great example of this is situations where you come up short several times. Let's say you failed a certain test. Maybe it's getting your pilot's license. Maybe after failing the third time, you're thinking about no longer pursuing it. The thinking can creep in about, if I couldn't pass it the first 3 times, what makes me think that I can pass it on the 4th try? And maybe you do convince yourself, you know what? I'm going to go ahead and try it anyways, but I already know that I'm going to fail. History has shown me that I'm just going to come up short again, but I might as well give it a try. With that type of approach, it's already setting the tone for how you're going to prepare yourself, or in this case, the lack of preparing yourself. Thinking this way is really going to make you not take things so seriously, and that means not putting your best effort forward. Yes, those moments can be hard to deal with, and they need to be processed effectively by really reflecting on them, getting to a neutral state where you're trying to pick it apart on what was done right, what was done poorly, and what can be done better. This helps to take away that sharpness when you're replaying, walking through all the things that were done to find answers to help you the next time. By taking this approach, it can get you to look forward to what is still yet to come, that gets you to make changes for the better right now. It's just consistently focusing on getting better each day, being present in the now. This helps you to be less caught up in the outcome of the past and are just focusing on what you can do going forward. So then the thinking shifts from, if I couldn't pass it the first 3 times, what makes me think I can pass it on the 4th try? To then saying, I've already taken it 3 times. I'm familiar with the questions that are going to be asked, and I know how I prepared and what I can do better, ensuring that I give myself a better chance of passing. And if it's not on the 4th try that I pass it, then I can take it a 5th or 6th time. Really, it's just an opportunity to build that resiliency and grit to overcome that point of resistance. This is part of the breakthroughs that happen. The key difference between expecting that things are just going to go wrong versus expecting that you can overcome what you set out. The key difference between expecting that things are just going to go wrong versus expecting that you can overcome what you set out for is knowing you have a chance. And that's just sparked by hope. So you got to reinforce that with some sort of action and continue that. This approach really helped me overcome some adversity that I faced when I was in college. The first semester I got into my major, one of my courses was plant breeding. And because it was different than what I was used to and how the professor taught the course, where it simply wasn't just a lecture, but it was more sort of storytelling that provided relevant information related to the subject that he was discussing. So he would have a standard slide presentation with certain bullet points to highlight what he was talking about. And then he'd follow that up with a particular situation and how a breeding program went about reaching their objective. And the tests that he gave out were anywhere from 5 to 9 questions, and they were really about explaining your answers. There was no multiple choice. It was formatted to give a situation, and then we would have to explain how to handle that situation. My approach to studying was just really going over the bullet points, really just memorizing to eventually regurgitate it. Because that's kind of what I was conditioned to do in high school. Just taking a bunch of information and spit it back out. And this proved to be very ineffective. So that first exam, I ended up getting a 37. And I was shockingly disappointed. I knew I did poor on the exam, but not by that much. So that anger and frustration I felt had me in a very down state where I lost confidence and belief in myself, just thinking about, how did I even get into this college? It was a mistake that they admitted me here. What am I going to do now about this? But the next time I saw the professor, I just asked him, what do I need to do to improve my grade? And he told me, while yes, it's important to memorize the notes that are put on the slides, he's really more focused on being able to absorb the information and apply it in real world situations. It's more conceptual instead of facts based. So with that in mind, I immediately dedicated 18 to 22 hours per week for the next 3 weeks to effectively prepare myself for the next exam. And I would just continuously go over the information to where it eventually clicked, and it became conversational to me. So I was able to explain how I would use certain plant breeding techniques and certain situations to meet specific goals. While I still had some pessimism, I was able to use that as a source of fuel to get me to consistently study, because if I didn't, then I give myself less of a chance of doing well on the next exam. And yeah, there were times where I was like, man, I don't feel like studying, but that little bit of pessimism kind of forced me to take action. So the day of the second exam, I obviously was nervous, never really dreading it, but thinking about, you know what, I think I understand the material well enough, and I'm just going to go out there and give my best. As I was taking the exam, I was getting more and more comfortable, gaining confidence that I could explain myself. It no longer was merely regurgitating information that I took in, but it was demonstrating that I understood the subject about, the questions that were asked. I walked away from that exam honestly being satisfied with the way I handled the initial disappointment, the way I prepared myself to give my best. And while obviously I was still concerned about what my grade was going to be, I was happy with the whole process. So then when the professor gave back my exam, I obviously was nervous, expecting kind of different ranges of outcomes, and was surprised to know that I got a 91. So it was a big dramatic improvement. My past results did not prove to happen again because I changed my behaviors from the past. And you can do the same to really highlight the things that make you great, where your strengths are coming out and they're becoming more and more developed, and your weaknesses are managed and even improved on. That gives you more confidence to handle yourself in the situations that you come across. Change is always going to be a constant. So when you can have a good level of optimism, looking forward to what is yet to come, you have more of a tendency to wake up with more want because you have higher levels of energy and enthusiasm. That really makes a difference in what you do and how you prepare that determine the outcome. There doesn't need to be an always optimistic point of view, but just a certain level that really suits you. Yes, there are going to be times where adversity strikes. You're up against some really difficult challenges where you get angry and frustrated. And when that happens, just acknowledge it because it makes you aware of how you're behaving. And this helps to move on from it a little bit quicker. That allows you to reset so you can focus on what needs to be done to improve what you're doing. This helps to manage your emotions from it taking over that causes destruction because it's led by some of the flaws that become more magnified. Then we start thinking that's all we are, flawed, that we have so many shortcomings, and when that becomes a focus, pessimism grows. Remember, a certain level of pessimism is good to have because it can help make you aware of the downsides and the risk. But if that's all that's top of mind, then it just weakens your urge to want to do well and not want to work as hard. It just feeds the, why even bother when I know I'm going to fail? Even when your past shows you that you've come up short over and over again, look less at the outcome and more at what was done that led to the outcome, because that's where you're going to find all the answers, all the types of corrections that need to be made that's going to change things going forward. This is going to help you get to a neutral state so you can do what's necessary, giving your best that ultimately leads to great outcomes. But the joy comes from what is yet to come, knowing that better is ahead. And when you have that outlook, it seems like anything is possible that you're willing to take on. I really hope you enjoyed this episode. If you're interested in more topics like this, become a Thriving Minds member at www.thrivingminds.live. It's your personal development resource so you can build that right mindset so you can live to thrive. Remember, subscribe to our podcast and our channel. All right, until next time.